We have folks that join us week after week, not only just from different places within the United States, but even outside of the United States. And that really excites us. And so let us know where you're joining the conversation from. And if you also feel inclined to share your LinkedIn information, we do welcome that. You can go to the chat and share it there. That lets us know that you are willing for this community to connect with you even beyond this hour of time. I'm seeing lots of Floridians, which is not unusual because our guest, that's where she is actually stationed and based. I also see Georgia and South Carolina, which is where we are based. So happy to see each of you. And speaking of sharing your LinkedIn information, I would love to connect with each of you. So my team will share my LinkedIn actually into the chat. And if we aren't connected, then let's make that happen. I wish to also let you know that at NWC, we really do value disability inclusion. So closed caption has been enabled for those who may find benefit in having that available to you today. Many of you are aware that in addition to having our live audience via Zoom, we also go live on LinkedIn, and there are a number of people that catch our show just by scrolling LinkedIn. So if that's your situation today, I want to welcome you. Feel free to leverage the comment section because we are watching that closely and we're bringing in some of that chatter into the Zoom chat as well. And so we want to make sure that we're being all inclusive of the voices and all the individuals that are taking part in today's opportunity for our Intentional Conversation VodCast. Okay, once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations. Hope you enjoy the show. Let the conversations begin indeed. And I once again just want to welcome each of you to today's episode of Intentional Conversations. We have a wonderful show lined up with a great guest co-host, and I don't want to delay any moments and having you the opportunity to be able to engage with her. But one of the things that we like to do before we jump into that dialogue is to share some information relevant to NWC, just some opportunities for you to have top of mind. And I want to say happy Pride Month. June is Pride Month. And so I want to make sure that we are leaning into that we're doing whatever we can to stand in solidarity and to show allyship to members of the LGBTQIA plus community. And so let's not make this just something that we do during the month of June as the national observance, but let's make sure that we're leaning into those opportunities all throughout the year. I also want to let you know that Juneteenth is the month that we're actually going to be celebrating Juneteenth, and that comes up on the 14th. And so if you have not yet already identified ways in which to create meaningful experiences, maybe for your workplace, then call us up, let us know. We'd love to be a partner to you in that regard. But no matter what you do, let's just make sure that we're all leaning into this message of freedom that really resonates with each and every one of us. And so I want to make sure that you all are thinking about that this month as we are recognizing Juneteenth. Many of you are aware that not only do we bring this opportunity to you week after week through our VodCast, where you can join live and you can actually see the interactions taking place with myself and our guest co-host, but then we extract the audio and we make the show available in podcast capacity wherever you like to get your podcast content. And so it's a reminder that we like to always continue to put into your hearing in case you have some folks in your network that prefer podcast content. I also want to let you know that at NWC, every so often, we will create a thought paper that is on a topic that we really are feeling a lot of energy around. And so in honoring of Juneteenth, I want to let you know that we have released a new thought paper, and it's entitled The Impact of Diluting or Not Recognizing Black History. So it's about honoring the past and empowering the future, which definitely is relevant to the month of June, where we do recognize Juneteenth. And so my team is going to place a link to that thought paper into the chat section, as well as into the comments if you're LinkedIn Live. And we hope that you will take a look at that and let us know your thoughts, and let's have some dialogue regarding the content that's found in that thought paper. Now, we also have started a text campaign, and this is only for those who like to get their content via text. We will not inundate you at all, but if you are interested in making sure that you do not miss any communication from us, including upcoming Intentional Conversations podcast or podcast information, then just scan that QR code and sign up, and we would love to have you a part of that community as well. Now, if you enjoy Intentional Conversations podcast or podcast, we want to know. We will every single week when you connect with us, we will share into the chat and into the comment section of LinkedIn a link to a survey for you to be able to give us your feedback. It helps us to be able to know the value of the content we're sharing. And we do use that for marketing purposes as well as just for our own benefit of refining and improving the experience for you week after week. So thank you so much in advance. We will also place that at the end of the show into the chat and the comment section again, for those of you who may miss it the first time. We are booking for co-hosts for now, Q3 and Q4. I think we have maybe 1 or 2 spots left for Q3, but if you know of someone that you think would make a great co-host, we would love to hear from you. Many of the individuals who have joined us on Intentional Conversations have come by way of recommendations from you, and we value that. So thank you for your time, and thank you for leveraging your network for our benefit. You can send those recommendations to Amora Carter, my colleague, simply at amora@nikalight.com. And we appreciate you in advance for that. Now, I want to take just a quick moment to give you what you have to look forward to in the upcoming weeks on Intentional Conversations VodCast by way of the guest co-host that we have secured. And so I'll take a moment to do that now. I'm excited that on June 14th, which is Juneteenth, we have Abby Adamson. And in that Intentional Conversation VodCast, we're going to discuss allyship being a lifelong practice, microaggressions in the workplace, holding leaders accountable for culture, and when to concede as a DEI consultant. Really rich topic that's timely, that I know that you're going to want to be a part of. So mark your calendars to join us on that date for Intentional Conversations. And then following on that next Friday, June the 21st, we have Dr. Nicole Price. And Nicole is actually a fellow Forbes Books author, so I cannot wait to welcome her and be in conversation. But we're going to be talking about her transition from chemical engineering to DEI leadership and pivoting towards empathy with a DEI lens, as well as influential readings on DEI and leadership. And I'm sure she's going to talk about her book as well. So I can't wait for that dialogue, and make sure that you're marking your calendars to join us. And then on June the 28th, we have another fabulous guest co-host. We had to reschedule her, so I was so excited to see that that new date has been identified, Shamine Abji, and we are actually going to be talking about how to intentionally define short and long-term success means, preventing bias from impacting your performance, 4 types of relationships to help you emerge as a leader, and ways women of color can overcome self-imposed imposter syndrome. That's going to be interesting. We know imposter syndrome happens a lot, but it's because of the systems. But the fact that sometimes it's also self-imposed is definitely a conversation that I want to be a part of. And I hope you will join me on June 28th for that dialogue. Now, it does me great pleasure to give you all a formal introduction to today's guest co-host, and I'm super excited about that. You know that one of the things I love to do is to read the formal bios of our guest co-hosts. I think it's a way to show respect and to honor the accolades, the credentials, the experiences that our guest co-hosts show up to this conversation with, and so today will be no different. So I hope you will help me today welcome Nirupa Netram. She is a female immigrant, Indian certified global diversity, equity, and inclusion professional, and attorney, a mediator, and arbitrator born in Guyana. She has over 25 years of experience in the corporate and other sectors in DEI, operations, human resources, program management, risk management, safety, compliance, law, and more. Nirupa earned her Bachelor of Business Administration cum laude from Stetson University and Juris Doctor from Stetson University College of Law. She founded Lotus Solutions, LLC, a Florida-certified woman and minority-owned business to help companies create a fair and just workplace through consulting, customized training and workshops, coaching, and keynote speeches in DEI, leadership development, and more. At Lotus Solutions, she has worked with regional, national, and international businesses, including 12 countries and 5 continents, to help organizations create better leaders. Nirupa has appeared in multiple publications, including Forbes, Authority Magazine, The Chronicle of Philanthropy, and more. She is an Inclusion Allies Coalition, IAC, member and served on the IAC Social Media and Marketing Committee. Nirupa also served on the Strategic Planning Task Force of the Center for Global Inclusion. The Florida Bar appointed her to serve on their Standing Diversity and Inclusion Committee and Gender Equality Subcommittee. Nirupa serves on several local DEI committees. She co-chairs the Lee County Board Association's Immigration Law Practice section, which she is championed creating. So I hope that you will find those emojis, find those words of affirmation, whatever you have to do right now to let our guest co-host know how welcome she is. I would appreciate you joining with me to do that. I'm going to add her to the spotlight. And I just want to just open us up by saying, I'm going to release you, Nirupa, to greet this audience in your own way. But before you do so, one of the traditions that we have here at NWC and at Intentional Conversations VodCast is to ask our guest co-hosts to please share with us, as they greet us, something about themselves that we would not know from reading and listening and hearing their bio, or from looking at their LinkedIn profile. So welcome, my friend. I'm so glad you're here. I want to turn it over to you at this time.
Thank you so much, Nika. It's such an honor to be with you today. And I was thinking hard about this question, and I did something very controversial in my undergraduate education. I was a business major, as you mentioned, but what I did was I took an art class. So as a business major, I went to the School of Arts and took a drawing class, and they could not believe that somebody from that school had stepped over to the other side. And it was a really great opportunity.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that. I think that it just models that sometimes we have to step out of our bubbles, right? And try and do something different. We may surprise ourselves as well as others. And so thank you so much. Well, first I want to just, acknowledge the fact that we just celebrated AIPI month. And I would love for you just to share your thoughts on what did you observe from organizations and workplaces and just different individuals, maybe perhaps as you were just perusing social media throughout the month, what did you discover that maybe you want to socialize in terms of your observations of how in which people were standing in solidarity and recognizing AAPI Heritage Month?
I love seeing the recognition that was happening on social media platforms like LinkedIn, Twitter. There's so many companies, highlighting the rich culture of AAPI Americans. So that was amazing to see, everything from food to dance to religious traditions, even us being known for our large and sometimes elaborate weddings.
Fantastic. Now, another question related to that would be, what would you like to see more of that perhaps was missing from the conversations, or, you didn't notice as much in your observations this year? I think this is an opportunity for people to be able to learn from you as they continue to think about ways to meaningfully show up for the AAPI community.
What I didn't see, and it may be happening, I just didn't see it necessarily on social media, is AAPI women sharing their journeys and their challenges and the strategies they've used to overcome many things you and I are going to talk about today.
Yes.
The barriers in the workplace that we often face. So I'd like to see more of those real conversations happening in the workplace.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that insight. Okay, so let's jump right in. And by the way, I see some smiling faces. Cameras are welcome for those of you who are part of our Zoom community, but we also know that many people will just join in auditory capacity. And so in whatever way in which you're showing up today, we are grateful for your presence. So let's talk about your background and how you came to establish Lotus Solutions, and what impact do you aim to achieve through your consulting and training services?
I found myself in the midst of the pandemic, and I was losing a job that I loved due to the fact it was tied to grant funding that was ending. And I've been a longtime DEI champion, and I didn't want to just sit back and do nothing. So I said, I'm going to launch a consulting company around DEI, something I've always cared about and means a lot to me. And the goal is to really educate others on why this is important and why it should be embedded into every type of organization. Because as we know, our nation and our world, it's only getting more diverse. And
Mm.
all of this boils down to really helping leaders become better leaders.
Absolutely. That is so well stated. And as we continue to see language shifting, where now people are talking about the global majority, it is to lean into this message of we're soon going to find ourselves where the majority of the individuals that are all over are people of color. They are what's kind of known often right now as minorities. And so that shift in language is really important. So how has Nirupa, your cultural background influenced your career path and your experiences in the workplace?
That's a great question, Dr. Nika. As you mentioned, I am of Indian heritage. And growing up, all I heard from the people around me was becoming a doctor. That seemed to be the only career path. And I knew that I did not want that career path, mainly because I'm very squirmish about blood. So I knew I wanted to break that mold. And I remember, watching the television and not seeing lawyers that looked like me, whether they were
Mm.
legal commentators, whether they were actors. And I really love the concept of law, the debate, the analysis. And from a young age, I was telling people, I am going to be an attorney. And I think that was important because not only did I love those traits of being a lawyer, but again, I wanted to break this mold that women can do more than be doctors in my culture.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much. I've heard that before from some other Asian women who have been in community together as part of a cohort to talk about that same thing. And so thank you for sharing that. I would love for you to share with us a little bit more about how the intersection of your legal background aligns and helps you to show up as a DEI practitioner in this space.
I love having that legal background in the DEI space because I think it allows me to spot potential issues,
Right.
meaning potential legal concerns. And when I'm serving in that DI role, I'm not also serving as an attorney. So it's something that if I'm working with a client, I can share, you maybe want to talk with your legal counsel about this issue before we go forward on this initiative, because we know that there's so much litigation, especially right now, unfortunately, around DI initiatives. So when I work with clients, I want to make sure that those initiatives are always compliant with the law.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I want to lean into that a bit more because one of the things that I know that I have experienced as a practitioner also in this space is that while risk management is something that's critically important for every organization, it certainly has a significant place. Sometimes it also can create challenges whereby those who are really championing DEI initiatives are looking to be innovative and looking to create new ways of really trying to create inclusivity within the workplace. And so, can you just share with us the ways that you help to balance that risk of from a compliance perspective with also making sure that the clients and the organizations that you work with are being bold and courageous in trying to create that change that we often want to see? How do you balance the two of those?
It is a difficult balance, and I think a lot of DEI practitioners are struggling with this. But I find a way to balance it with my clients is involving everyone in the conversation, being collaborative, not saying, well, let's maybe do this and then take it to legal. Let's
Yeah.
all have the conversation together about what we want to do so that legal understands what the goal is, what the outcomes are before they say yay or nay to it. So I think having that real collaborative process is critical.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'd love for you to share with us some unique challenges from your perspective and from your lived experience that Asian women face in the workplace, and how have you navigated those challenges throughout your career? And what are some tips that you also share with other Asian women to be able to navigate it as well?
It can be challenging at times navigating that in the workplace. And I think of things, there's the perception, and I'm sure everyone has heard of this, the model minority.
It's gonna get there. Yes.
We are perceived as high achieving, hardworking, very ethical. And so while that is great, there is a lot of pressure that comes with that. And unfortunately, we still face barriers in the workplace, barriers such as stereotypes, biases around being a woman,
Yes.
around our names. So I think there is so much to overcome, and it can be very challenging. And I know I've spoken with other women, and we often don't talk about this. And that's why I mentioned earlier, it's so important that we have conversations like this so others know the challenges that we face. And in the workplace, I didn't find myself that I had anyone in community that I could speak with. So I really focused on doing great work, achieving and exceeding my goals, and being a great leader to my team.
I appreciate that. You spoke about the model minority, and I don't know if my team can try to source this, but there was an article that my dear friend Deepa Purushothaman, you may know her, Rupa, that she wrote on the model minority. And so if we could find that and place it into the chat, I think it'll be a great resource for this community, if you're interested in going deeper into this model minority concept. So what strategies have you found to be effective in balancing your cultural identity with adapting to predominantly, Western work culture? How do you balance those two?
That can be a very difficult balance at times. And I will tell you, unfortunately, it wasn't until much later in my career
Mm,
that I really shared about my cultural identity.
mm,
Right now, I do share about my traditions, as I mentioned earlier, traditions around weddings, around funerals,
yeah.
around important holidays like Diwali. And my goal is to
Mm,
educate people about my culture. And it's very hard because I think of so many everyday things that maybe aren't necessarily inclusive. And I'll share
yeah.
more what I mean about that. I regularly think of prayer, food, and clothing. And I'll start with prayer. There's so many events I go to that are non-religious, whether they're meetings, whether they're awards, whether they're banquets, and they open with a Christian prayer. And I'm always sitting there wondering, how do the other religions in the room feel about this?
Yes.
Because to me, it just isn't very inclusive. And I think we can be better when we have these events. And
Mm-hmm.
in terms of food, as a Hindu, I don't eat beef. I know
Mm-hmm.
many folks of the Muslim faith, they don't eat pork. I choose not to eat either. And there's so many events I go to, and the entree is a steak, or there's some sprinkle of bacon into everything, whether it's ice cream, whether it's soup. And sometimes you might not know. And I think people need to be more conscious that some of these things actually violate religious tenets, that
Mm,
we don't want to unknowingly be eating anything. And when I think of dress, I go to many awards and banquets, and I love to dress up, but I never see my fellow Indian women, especially, wearing any traditional clothing. They're not wearing the beautiful saris and the colorful langas. And I would like that to change. I would like all of this to change. And I think it's such small changes that will go a long way.
yeah. So, so good. I want to stay here for a second because I think that what you're sharing is really good insight that sometimes people do not consider and think of. And I think that one of the values of such a podcast community is that as we are learning, we begin to model, we begin to maybe change and alter some of our behaviors to become more inclusive. And I just want to comment on some of the examples that you gave. You are absolutely correct. I live in South Carolina. This is kind of considered the Bible Belt, of the United States. And so I too have shown up to many different events where a Christian prayer has been what's been delivered, right? And when I'm starting to see those for those organizations who are really deeply wanting to be much more inclusive, they are, leveraging just time for just, moments of silence for however which people want to spend that time. And I think that that does create a situation where people do not feel alienated. Um, And so thank you for bringing that to our attention. And I also just want to acknowledge that even outside of the religious, nature of the conversation, when you brought up food as one of the areas too that needs to have people to be much more thoughtful about, we have a lot of, vegetarians, we have a lot of people that are vegan, and so I think that sometimes, and I've heard someone say this, I put on an event and they thanked me for having options that were delicious for vegetarians, and really what she was communicating is that normally when she communicates that she is a vegetarian, what's brought out to her is almost like an afterthought. It's not something that's planned in advance to where it's just as delicious. So she looks around and she's like, even though I don't eat that, your meal looks so much better than mine, and now I'm envious. So she was like, thank you for really considering that. So small things really do make a difference. And I think there's also something to be said for event organizers and planners to be able to simply just encourage, that feel free to wear whatever type of garb that makes you feel included and a sense of belonging as part of this endeavor. So simple things I just wanted to amplify. And I so appreciate you bringing that to the conversation, because I do think there's something that we all can learn from these really simple thoughts that we could be a bit more thoughtful about. Awesome. I'm seeing Tracy shared into the chat that vegetarians also eat lots of salad. Okay, thank you. And by the way, we do certainly encourage communicating in our chat or in the comment section. If you're watching LinkedIn Live, it helps us to extend our sense of community with each other. And so keep the conversations, the sentiments going into the chat. Now, we've talked about model minority myth. I also now want to talk about bamboo ceiling, because this is also something that's really important that maybe members of our community have not heard of. But can you explain that concept? And also, have you experienced or observed that in your career? What strategies do you recommend for overcoming it? Bamboo ceiling, what is it?
Great question, Dr. Nika. The bamboo ceiling is the barriers that Asian Americans face in the workplace in achieving those top leadership roles, despite the fact that they are more than well qualified and have the skills. And again, those barriers can be visible, they can be invisible, they can encompass all the things that we've talked about: racism, all the isms, discrimination, all the biases. I was reading a study recently that 57% of Asian American women say this has impacted their careers. That is more than half. Right. And to me, that is a really sad and startling statistic. And I want to say, unfortunately, I have experienced, and the women in my network that I know, you asked me about overcoming it. I sadly don't know a woman that's overcome it. We do our best to navigate around it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to bring to this community's attention that, we've probably are more familiar with glass ceiling. And even when you think about Black African American women, there's a phenomenon referred to as concrete ceiling, which is we can't even see to be able to break through anything, right? And so, I bring that up to share that bamboo ceiling is kind of a part of those conversations that are being having to extend how these circumstances impact different types of women across different ethnicities, backgrounds, and races. And so if there's someone that is looking for a sense of support as maybe they are navigating it and they're trying to overcome it, what would be some things that you would recommend? I would imagine maybe that community, because you've kind of brought that up before, but community with others. So expound upon your thoughts on that.
The community with others is really essential. I find connecting with other Asian American women and sharing these frank stories. And one of the things I loved about LinkedIn, it's such an easy platform to connect with people that are like-minded. I mean, that's how you and I met, Dr. Nika.
Yes.
So thank you, LinkedIn. And I think having those conversations and then continually educating people about the bamboo ceiling, about the various forms of bias, stereotypes. And as you mentioned, unfortunately, it seems like every woman is still facing some kind of great impediment in their career.
Yeah.
In 2024, I think that's a really sad reality, and we need to do more. We need to mentor, be allies, be sponsors. And we need to involve men in this conversation too, because they can be all of those things to us. So I think conversation for me is the key to moving forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing them into the conversation because, yes, oftentimes we find that many organizations are still heavily populated with men in those leadership roles. And so we do need for them to also be advocates and champions of helping to sponsor and really create a culture where women can really excel in those environments. So lifting as we climb is also really important for the women that have been able to aspire to those roles. I know that sometimes, I often am a part of conversations where maybe some women are reluctant to lift others up once they've reached a certain place in an organization. And I think that we have to really try to combat that way of thinking because we have to protect the full turf. When one of us wins, all of us win, right? So we need to be certainly lifting others as we are climbing. And I think that's going to help really change the trajectory of what we're seeing right now that continues to hinder women in leadership roles. I also love, Nirupa, that you mentioned storytelling. I think that when we are in community with others and we hear people share their stories, it gives us permission to then share our stories. And through hearing these stories and witnessing the vulnerability, it does strengthen community, but it also strengthens, I think, our compassion, our care and concern. And through that, we are better positioned to then take action to do things, right? Even if it feels incredibly uncomfortable. So I'm a big fan of storytelling, and I do think that, to your point, community and storytelling is a great way to help women navigate some of the complexities of what we're seeing. So I'm noticing in the chat, there's sort of some good stuff happening there. Janice mentions, yes, many people who follow faith traditions have food requirements, guidance, as well as so many individuals with allergies and adverse reactions. So that's going back to our conversation of how can we be more inclusive and thoughtful when it comes to food and prayer and clothing when we are gathering and convening for different events. I want to talk about now some lessons that you've learned from your extensive experience in DEI, operations, human resources, and law that you apply to your consulting work. You touched on this before, but I want to bring in some of the other disciplines that you have lots of experience around and how all of those are intersecting to help you and your consultancy be effective in supporting those that you work with.
Thank you, Dr. Nika. I think one of the lessons I've learned is a simple one, is to treat people how they want to be treated and recognizing those individual preferences because they matter. We can't, use the blanket for everyone anymore. That used to be the norm, that we treated everyone the same, but we need to treat everyone the way they want to be treated. Yes. And I also see right now, going back a little bit to the legal, there are a lot of legal decisions coming out that I know many of us disagree with. And the thing I would like folks to understand is that when a court reaches a decision, it is supposed to be on sound legal analysis, rules, laws, precedents, court cases. And when that doesn't seemingly happen, I think we need to look at who is bringing the lawsuit. Yeah. Why are they bringing the lawsuit? And what are the systems in place that we need to advocate to change so that these things are not even coming to the judicial system? Mm-hmm. You talked a little bit about my background. I spent 12 years writing judicial decisions every day. So I knew how hard it was to reach those right outcomes. And so I think that's really critical. And something you just talked about is so important. I think every day we need to strive to inspire, uplift, and support another human being. Absolutely. It may be such a simple act, but we need to do that every day. You can really make someone's day. And it's not even about that. I believe as a human being, we have a duty to help each other. And like you said, whether you're climbing or whether you're falling, you can do it. Yeah,
Yes. And just today, there have been so many opportunities where you've brought to the conversation some really practical ways to do that. I think sometimes people assume that they need to, carry the title of chief diversity officer, manager, director, or leader, or have those elements very explicitly written into their job descriptions before they can serve in this capacity of showing for a high level of humanity, for just our peers and those that we may encounter. And I also love the recognition of this individual nature in which we need to be operating, because there is no one size fits all approach. As you mentioned before, I've talked about that a lot on Intentional Conversations, where, even as we think about how we prepare our leaders to manage and lead and coach and influence and mentor those that fall under their direct report, or even our peers, it is not about having one way that you apply across the board. We need to get to know our people and let that information inform how in which we are offering support. And the way in which we provide support can look different from moment to moment, day to day, based upon the individuals and what they're dealing with. And so this is really rich, and I hope that this audience is getting a lot of value from what we are discussing. I will let you know that momentarily we will be shifting, and I will invite our community to share questions and commentary as you see fit. If you're part of our Zoom community, you can do so by using the raise hand feature that lets me know that you're willing to be called upon, invited to unmute yourself, and I'll add you to the spotlight if your camera is on. If not, and you just prefer to share your comments and your questions into the chat, we're watching that, and we will try to take as many of those as possible. The same applies to our LinkedIn Live audience. Go to the comment section, share your comments and your questions, and we will bring that to the live conversation here. While you're percolating on what curiosities could be surfacing from you, I'm going to go to the next question to give you a few more moments to think about that. But here is my next question for you, Nirupa. In your opinion, what are the most critical elements for creating a fair and just workplace?
That's a great question, as all of your questions have been. I think it's important that we embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into every aspect of the organization. It can't just be a celebration around a certain month or a luncheon. It needs to be embedded and ingrained in every aspect of the company. And I think it's also important that we create a workplace that people feel safe, they feel heard, they feel seen, and they feel respected and valued. And along those lines, I think we also need to have a zero tolerance in the workplace for unethical and illegal conduct. And I say that because I was reading a story, and I won't name the organization, an organization that has a very robust commitment to DEI. And after a thorough investigation, their top leader was found, I won't say guilty, but he was found to have engaged in sexual harassment. And he will be stepping down. And his statement was, "I'm going to step down when I find a successor." And I thought, no, somebody has said that you are committing sexual harassment in the workplace. That organization needs to say, you leave immediately, and we will find an interim leader. So I think having DEI doesn't necessarily mean that you have the zero tolerance. It should, but I think we need to have those two important elements so that workplaces are not tolerating this type of bad and illegal behaviors in the workplace.
Absolutely. And to your point, far too often we hear stories are very similar nature. And also far too often, let me name that the consequences, there are huge disparities based upon who the individual is, right? The person that has been on the part of the offender side. And so I think there's something to be said for greater parity around not only how we are addressing through consequences, but also how in which we are covering these stories, and the media is really sharing this information, because I think that makes a difference as well. As you were talking about leaning into modifying systems and creating the change within policies and procedures, it just reminds me of the importance of recognizing that there's a key difference between activity when we talk about DEI actioning versus impact, right? activity has a start and an end date. Impact is where we're looking at systems, policies, procedures, and culture, and we really are trying to drive towards sustainable change, not just change for a temporary period of time, but sustainable change. And I think that is something that I know I personally would like to see more organizations commit to. Those cultural events, they can be very meaningful if they're done well in terms of helping to build up people's cultural intelligence. But if we aren't careful, it becomes just that, just a program or a moment in time, right? And I think that thinking deeper about everything that we do from a DEI perspective is something that will serve us better if we just really take the time to think through that. Okay, so I'm currently not seeing any hands raised or questions into the chat. I am seeing a really good comment, though, from Emily, who has joined our podcast on a couple occasions. And she says it's the day-to-day experiences on teams that matter in the workplace, for sure. She goes on to say that that's where DEI can make a very meaningful impact. And I agree, it's the day-to-day simple things. Sometimes my background at the top, it'll say making DEI practical. And it's because I'm one of those practitioners that I really do believe that we have to uncomplicate this work. We see it as so daunting, as my book title and your background says, inclusion uncomplicated. But sometimes I think that the way we can engage people is to help them to see the small steps that are really meaningful they can take every single day, and to do that in a practical way. So just wanted to amplify that. I want to talk about your approach to customized training and workshops. So how do you approach designing customized training and facilitation of different designs of workshops for diverse organizations across different regions and cultures?
I first start by understanding where the organization is and gaining that understanding from a variety of stakeholders, from the top leadership, from other employees, from board members, external stakeholders, and then determining where they want to be and making sure that every solution, whether it's a program, it's an initiative, a workshop, or a training, is tailored to meet those two things, where they are and where they want to be. And then accounting, as you mentioned, for those differences across countries, across regions, across cultures is so important. And that's why that first step in understanding where people are, you need to involve the people from the different countries, regions, and cultures, so you can understand the needs of everyone in the organization.
Yeah, that's important. Make sure we're thinking about everyone. And at NWC, we tend to use language like learning experiences versus training, only because sometimes we think that people perceive training as almost reaching a destination rather than it being this continuation of always, evolving and deepening our knowledge and understanding. But what I'm interested in is, what are you seeing from a topic perspective, content-wise, that has become most popular of late that organizations are asking for?
I see organizations really asking for, like you said, whether it's conversation or a workshop around inclusion. How do we make everyone feel included? How do we make people feel that they belong? Because I think there's just so much misinformation around the acronym DEI.
Of course.
And some people perceive it to be excluding, which is mind-boggling. So I think getting back to the basics of how do we make everybody feel included? How do we make people feel that they can show up every day and be themselves? And like you said, DEI is really about doing something simple every day. I remember being in the workplace when I was in a legal setting, and the people that we then had paper files, which may be giving away a little bit about my age, and they would bring the files and they said, you're the only one that talks to us and greets us. None of the other staff even speak to us or acknowledge us. And I remember my last day in that job, my desk was filled with flowers from the staff who I know, they weren't making a lot of money. And they sent me all these flowers and they said, gosh, we're going to miss you because no one treats us like you do. And I thought it was such a sad state.
Yeah.
Because our work that we do, whether we're consultants, whether we're full-time employees, it's just a job title. It's not who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And people do not want to be rendered as invisible. And so if we are missing opportunities to just simply say hello, a fist bump, a wave, a good morning, good afternoon. I mean, even in this distributed workforce where we're just seeing people for the first time, maybe in a virtual capacity, sharing some type of little greeting into the chat or verbalizing, hello, how are you today? Some of the small chat, I think that is a courtesy that sometimes gets lost. Right now we don't tend to recall the true importance of that as a way to build relationships and to just show care and concern for one another. So I love that you brought belonging to the conversation as well. I often share that it is hard for any person, regardless of their background, their demographics, any person to show up at their best in any environment if they're always questioning whether or not they belong, right? Do I belong here? Am I seen? Am I valued? Am I heard? Do I have full opportunity for success? If people are questioning those things, then most often they are not bringing their A game to that environment because either they feel like they have to conform to mainstream way of thinking and they have to shrink back and hide portions of their identity. And that saddens me when I really think about the personal impact that it can have on an individual. So that in and of itself should give all of us pause to want to find a way to be much more intentional about creating inclusivity in all the spaces where we may have influence to do so. Okay, so there's still opportunity for questions and comments. Let me share what I'm seeing into the chat. I'm hearing a lot around helping individuals and teams have difficult conversations with upcoming election in the U.S. context, global scenarios, etc. This is from Emily as well. Thank you, Emily. Additionally, more and more around disability inclusion and then neurodivergence within that. Absolutely. Those are also topics that we are seeing rise to the occasion. And I want to say something about the first topic, which also, Nirupa, you mentioned, and that is how do we effectively have difficult conversations? When we put it in context, as Emily has brought to the conversation, that this is a really high stakes kind of election year in the U.S. We do know that placing importance and putting reminders out there around civil discourse and around really trying to eliminate and minimize against hate speech in the workplace is really important as well. And so how do we have those difficult conversations? Because I don't think that it's realistic to just expect people to not talk about things that impact them every single day, right? We can't leave those conversations and those portions of who we are outside of the workplace, even though I know that is one of the ways many organizations try to deal with it. And so with that being said, I would love for you to just comment on what are some of the things that you're telling organizations this day and time as they are looking for ways to really help create that high level of respectability and civil discourse and just a boldness around choosing courage over comfort when having to engage in difficult conversations.
I think one of the things that I talk to companies with, and I see more leaders doing, whether it's through my coaching or consulting, is opening meetings and conversations with checking in with people. How are you doing? And sometimes it's specifically mentioning an issue that's maybe in the headlines. How are you doing with it? Let's take a moment and go off agenda and talk about this. How does everyone feel? And having that moment for people to share what's bothering them, how do they feel? So I think people really feel, valued when you have that time for them to have conversation with each other instead of just moving along to your agenda and just saying, hi, how is everyone doing? Because everyone's going to say we're doing great. But when you make that space for people to share their opinions on things that are impacting them, and I feel like every day there's probably at least, 5 things that are deeply impacting us. So I think continually having those moments for people to share what's impacting them and then asking, how can you support them? What
Yeah.
can you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Operating business as usual does not always serve us well, even in the context of the workplace, because we do hear a lot of criticism from employees who are taken aback by um, the organizational culture not being one that really prioritizes being people centered, right, human centered. And so I do think that that's a great point for all of us to keep top of mind. And it just goes back to what you've been sharing throughout this time together today, which is the importance of that individuality, really building relationships, getting to know people. And so it's critical to amplify that. How do you stay up to date on the latest trends and developments in DEI? We know that the space is evolving. We know that lots of noise is really clouding the way in which people are thinking about and engaging in the work of DEI. But how are you navigating through your business, the shifts that you're seeing and experiencing, and perhaps you're staying steadfast with exactly where you started, but just help us to understand how you've been addressing some of the trends and some of what you've been seeing development-wise into this space.
I like to stay updated on what's happening. So I'm reading articles, attending webinars, listening to podcasts like yours, connecting with thought leaders like you to see what are they talking about. And you mentioned I belong to the Inclusion Allies, which is a great resource for practitioners. They have really great communities and webinars. So I think staying informed on what is happening. And I also like to follow and read the writings or reports or white papers by people who are positive. I find right now that there are even some leaders, unfortunately, that are filled with hate and incivility. And I stay away from that. I try not to do that myself, and I don't want to be affiliated with anyone that's doing that. So really staying top of mind on what's happening in this field, what are the challenge, being a lawyer, also the legal developments, and there seem to be many and daily, and just making sure that I'm incorporating that when I'm having conversations with clients, when I'm doing workshops, so I know what today's challenges are, and then bringing that in to find out, is the organization experiencing challenges like this? And here are some potential solutions. I feel it's an interesting time for DEI where sometimes we have to get creative. I've worked with clients who said, I don't want to do work around DEI. And then when I talk about, as I did earlier, it's about helping people become better leaders. They say, oh, well, yes, we want that. So sometimes it's just even something simple as shifting the wording, because it all boils down to how can we change behavior? How can we be better?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of practitioners to lean into the idea of reframing and shifting the language and modifying how in which we're talking about this work, just so that the work can continue. And so I definitely think that that is something that's on the rise. And I am of the persuasion there's no judgment. We just need to make sure we continue to do the work. And that does require us being very agile and innovative and creative and strategic in our approach, because we have to keep the work going. Have you identified any significant shifts in your consultancy in the way in which maybe you approach this body of work because of what you're seeing and hearing in terms of the attack on the space at all?
I have pivoted at times depending on the client. There are some, I worked with a client recently and they wanted to use the words DEI. And I know in my community where I'm based, unfortunately, it's a very polarized term. And I suggested that I would do the engagement without using those words because I'm not sure how the attendees would react. And this particular engagement was filled with DEI, but we never used those words. We used other words to bring it to the forefront that this is important. It is here to stay, regardless of what you call it.
Absolutely. And I think that's to show that we still can be effective, right? Even if we have to make those shifts based upon who that we're servicing and that we are really trying to bring along on this journey. And so for other practitioners out there, don't be afraid to reimagine where you feel like you may need to. I know that I've also seen some criticism around you're not a DEI purist if you stop using the language. And I think that that's just dividing and creating the tension that we don't need when there's already enough naysayers who are imparting tension every single day. So let's just keep supporting each other in whatever ways in which we are able to be effective in reaching and engaging people in such a conversation that's important, because we need all of us to be a part of this dialogue. You're getting some love in the chat. I'm not sure if you're paying attention to it, but Carolyn Rogers says that civility is imperative. I always learn from Nirupa. So folks are definitely appreciative of your leadership and how you show up to this space. So as we wind down, we have maybe about 5 minutes left, and I want to give you the opportunity to close us out in a way that feels good for you. And one of the things that we often ask a lot of our guest co-hosts to share with us during the last few minutes is, what are some insights that you have a lot of energy around that you would like to socialize with this community? What have you been saying that people haven't been hearing, or that's on the horizon for you that you would like for this community to know? Or what have I not asked you about that you are really interested in sharing with us?
Well, first of all, I've so enjoyed our conversation and our time
Likewise.
together, and learning from you and all the great comments in the chat and questions. I'm really excited that I will be speaking at a Sherm Tri-County event on July 19th around the power of inclusion. So I will be speaking to HR professionals, and very excited. And when I speak, I like to be very interactive, as we are today. I never want to be the one speaking for an hour or more. I find everyone would be asleep or extremely bored. So I'm looking forward to that interactive session, and we're going to have a robust group of attendees. I'm also very excited that I recently launched a TikTok account. My handle is @LotusS LLC. And if you go to that account right now, I'm having some trouble getting in, but hopefully that'll be resolved. And that's where I really do videos around DEI. I talk about leadership development. I talk about books I'm reading or I recommend and why. So it's something really outside of my comfort zone for me, but I decided I didn't see a lot of practitioners in the space there. So I thought, why not try something different? And I think as far as takeaways, I just want people to know that if you in any way support this, which I know you all are because you are here, please be vocal about it, because there's so much myth, misinformation, disinformation around this. So be vocal about why it matters to you.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for those closing remarks. And we have shared all of your contact information, including your TikTok, into the chat. And so we hope that you will take advantage of following Nirupa and learning from her as she continues to produce great content. We also shared the Inclusion Coalition website. I know that you had referenced that earlier as a really good resource for folks who are looking to have a sense of community and to learn more regarding this space. And so thank you. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for sharing with us. We'd love to have you back in the future. And I just want to commend you on the work that you're doing and the leadership role that you are, how you're taking up space in your leadership roles. I want to invite this community to join us again next Friday for another episode of Intentional Conversations VodCast. And as I mentioned before, if you've enjoyed the show and there's been some value that you've received from being a part of this community, then the link that's been placed into the chat is to a quick survey. It should take you no more than 2 minutes, but we'd love to get your feedback. And have a safe and wonderful weekend. We'll see you all back here next week for another issue of Intentional Conversations. Thanks so much for joining.